Hi everyone. Before I begin, if you're able to like, share and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. Now let's get straight into it. So just some background on the content that I normally produce. It's primarily for engaged and seasoned FPL managers where I use a lot of technical terms. But then I realized that whilst I've got like a playlist for common FPL questions, I don't actually answer the most obvious question at all on any of my platforms. How do you play FPL? And I recognize this based on the sheer number of messages I've been getting recently from new managers. So what I'm going to do in this video is literally go back to basics and explain how to play FPL, or in its long form, Fantasy Premier League in terms of what it's called, but we'll use the acronym FPL, and how the game works, and we'll also cover some rules. And if you feel that this video is of benefit to any new managers that you know, then by all means, please share it with them as well. So let's get straight into it. Just from the get-go, I want to say that FPL isn't a game that you have much control over. It's not like a computer football game like, I'm not going to name any in particular, but the ones that are available on the market right now. So with FPL, it's really dependent on your performance is directly linked with how your fantasy football team does based on real life Premier League players' performance on the pitch. So if you've got a player that has scored a hat trick for a given day, then obviously your team will benefit as well directly. So you've got certain choices that you can make in terms of your team selection on a weekly basis, but it's all dependent on the real life players delivering the goods for your own fantasy football team. So just some quick history as well, that fantasy football, specifically for association soccer, has existed for decades. And it's been available in newspaper format and also in the online format as well, very early on. As for the official FPL game that we're covering in this video, it's been running since 2002. And remarkably, the format that we know the game in this current day, it's pretty much almost identical, more or less, to the game that was released back in 2002. The only exceptions being that, of course, the aesthetics have radically changed over the past 20 years. And with Fantasy Premier League, it literally runs for the entirety of the actual Premier League season, from August until May. And it's split into 38 rounds that are called Gameweeks. So before we get straight into the website as well, as you can see on screen there, you're going to have to register. So once you go on the main page and you fill in your details, you'll then complete the registration page. So what I'm going to do here is just go through the navigation of what you'll experience when you register, and then we'll go through the rules. So once you've registered, you'll then be prompted with your transfer selection straight away. And I want to just clarify something here, very importantly, that ultimately there are many ways to play the game. And yeah, there'll be coping mechanisms and tactics that the seasoned managers will use. But no, for the purpose of this video, I'm mindful that some people have literally just been forced into making a fantasy football team just because, let's say, their mates have told them to do so, or because they have literally just been pressured into it. Now, if you just literally want to pick any team and you don't really care about how your team does, literally just want to submit a team and be done with it, you can go on this screen here, click on auto pick, and once you've done auto pick, you'll get like 15 players that will appear in your team, and then you make your transfers and they get added into your team. You don't have to worry about captaincy or anything else. But if you want to actually put some thought into the players, then of course you'll need to do some research. You'll probably consume fantasy football content that's available online, and it's become so mainstream now that even celebrities comment about it and they even write about it as well. in this instance, I've got my own team here unselected. So I'm going to simply click on reset, just to get my team back. And of course, if you're registering for the first time, you won't really see this option here because you haven't made your picks ultimately. So in this case, I'm simply selecting all my players just to make it nice and easy. And I would click on make transfers if I hadn't registered. And then you get transported to the pick team page. And I mentioned that, look, FPL can be played in different ways. You might just want to pick players from a specific nationality. You might pick players because of the way their name sounds. That's completely fine. Play however you want to play. And if you're at the start of the journey of fantasy football and you're not really bothered about taking it seriously, that's completely fine. But I'm just covering the basics here in how the game is played. So you then come on to the My Team page. So those 15 players that you've selected, you have to pick a squad of 15. They automatically then get put here. And you've got your starting 11 on the green pitch. And then you've got your bench, which is a goalkeeper and 3 defenders. So by default, when you're on that automatic, well, you're on that transfer page, you have to pick 2 goalkeepers, you have to pick 5 defenders, have to pick 5 midfielders, 3 strikers, and the budget can't exceed £100 million. So that is your limit. And without sounding too complex, the prices do rise. They don't remain static as the season progresses. But just as a default, from the start, you've got £100 million budget. You can't exceed it. By all means, if you don't spend all the money, that's completely fine as well. So here's my team as it is right now. And in terms of formations, there are only specific formations that you can pick. So you always have to pick a minimum of 3 defenders. You can pick a minimum of 2 midfielders and a maximum of 5 midfielders. And when it comes to the strikers, you can pick a minimum of 1 striker, as you can see on screen there, and a maximum of 3 strikers. So you've got flexibility to a large extent, effectively, without like getting into the different formation permutations. You literally can start pretty much almost any formation so long as you've got at least 3 defenders and a maximum of 3 strikers, and you've got the flexibility in midfield. But let's get straight into the rules now. And of course, you can see here I've already picked a captain and a vice captain, and we'll cover that in the rule section. And I will share the links in the description below as well if you want to better understand how it works just by reading into the rules. So as we've covered, first of all, selecting your initial squad, that comes on that transfer page. You pick 15 squad players, but you have to start 11. And every game week, you can make changes however you wish, but we're going to come on to the caveats to that as well. Managing your squad, so you have to pick a captain, you have to pick a vice captain as well. And if you don't, it will just pick the default that you've got based on your automatic selection. So that's nice and simple there. And then coming on to transfers, you've got it used to be you could make however many transfers you wanted in a given round, or as we call it, a game week, but they've capped it, I believe, to a maximum of, I think, 5 or 6 transfers now per game week. But as a default, you always get 1 free transfer every game week. And if you don't make a transfer in a given game week, it then rolls over to the subsequent game week. And that only happens once. It doesn't constantly roll over. So if you didn't make a transfer in game week 1, it rolls over into game week 2. So you've got 2 free transfers. But if you don't make a transfer in game week 2, it still sticks with 2. So it's not constantly aggregating the transfers. Now, you're not limited to making just 1 transfer. If you feel that your team needs a radical overhaul, then by all means, you can take what we call in FPL parlance a hit, a -4, basically. So every transfer that is more than the free transfer that you have at hand, it will cost you -4 points. So that's something that you just need to keep in mind as well. And moving on to the next segment, chips. So the best way to describe chips are essentially like little turbo boosts that you are given throughout the season. And in total, you're given 5 of them. So I'm just going to expand this here just to show you. So they're called bench boost, free hit, triple captain, and wildcard. Now, I said 5 and there's 4 showing there. You actually get 2 wildcards throughout the season. So you get 1 wildcard in the first half of the season and 1 wildcard in the second half of the season. And a wildcard basically is a opportunity for you to make unlimited transfers without incurring like a -4 points deduction for every other transfer you make. And it's something that fantasy football managers do if they feel that the team needs a radical overhaul, essentially. And it's something that they will time depending on the time of the first half of the season and the second half of the season. As for the 3 chips, the other chips, so you've got 2 wildcards, and the other chips are triple captain chips. So by default, you saw on that first screen that the captain has to be picked, and your captain will always score double points in a given game week. That's the default. And with the triple captaincy chip, it basically multiplies it by 3, but you can only play that chip once. So you can just target the relevant match you want to use it for. It'll multiply it by 3 just for that 1 week out of 38. The other chip that we saw, it was called bench boost. Now, as you saw, you have to pick 11 starters and you get 4 on the bench. And normally, the bench players will never come into play. The only exception being, let's just show it here. Let's just say one of my players didn't start at all for a given game week. Then my first substitute on the bench will automatically substitute for the player that didn't start. So that's the only time that the bench will come into play for you. And with the bench boost, it basically says, doesn't matter who is starting or not in your starting 11, all of your bench players their points will get factored in. They won't be wasted. So that's something that, again, because of the potential of scoring a lot of points, our fantasy football managers will use that depending on the most optimal time for them. And that's something that they'll judge based on fixtures and other factors as well. And then lastly, the last chip that we're going to cover here is called free hit. So we talked about making unlimited transfers, which you can do at the start of the season before the first game week starts. You can make unlimited transfers with your first wildcard as well as your second wildcard. But what the free hit essentially does, it lets you make unlimited free transfers for a single game week. And then after that game week is completed, your team will revert to how the team was at the previous game week. So that's something that, again, fantasy football managers will look for the most optimal time for that to take place as well. But as was the case with a triple captaincy chip, bench boost, free hit can only be used once. And the wildcards, you've got to, like I've said, first half of the season, second half of the season, and that's it. So 5 chips in total out of 38 game weeks. You just need to use them wisely, essentially. Now, deadlines. So with this, every game week, before it commences, you must make your transfers by a specific deadline. Now, that deadline is normally an hour and a half before the first kickoff of that game week. And your team will be then locked in. So there we go, 90 minutes before each game week, before the start of that first match of the game week. And the times will vary significantly depending on if there's a Friday night game, Saturday lunchtime game, etc. But as you can see, for the first 4 game weeks, the deadline is on a Friday night. So just keep that in mind. But then as the season progresses, you'll see Saturday deadlines as well, as is the case here from game week 5 up until, well, just up until game week 14. So that deadline will fluctuate. You need to keep that in mind. It's not always going to be on a Friday. It's not always going to be on a Saturday. And the best way to find out when that deadline takes place, I'll just show you at the top of the screen. There we go, where it says Game Week 1, Friday, the 11th of August, 6:30. So that's when your first deadline takes place for this game week. And you'll always find it here. If you go to this fantasypremierleague.com, and I'll put the URL in the description as well, you'll always find it there. There are also alerts that you can set up as well through Fantasy Premier League for game week deadlines. And if I'm able to, I'll also put that in the description below as well. There we go, sync to calendar. It's right there. So that's something that you can do, that if you want to be like focused on making sure you don't miss a deadline, that sync to the calendar is very useful. So just keep that in mind as well. And it's something that I don't think a lot of FPL managers use. I personally have got the alerts enabled just in case I'm busy for the start of a given game week. But yeah, that is really useful to know and have as part of your planning. So coming back to the rules, just as a recap, we've covered selecting your initial squad, managing your squad, transfers, chips, deadlines. The next point is scoring. How are your points scored? Your points are scored based on a metric that is called fantasy returns. So what a fantasy return is, and it depends on the position as well, but for every position, well, for goalkeepers and defenders, they can get a fantasy return metric for clean sheets, so long as they've played a minimum of 60 minutes, goals scored, which of course is very rare for goalkeepers and also defenders, assists as well, and also bonus points. So once a match is completed, official FPL have a mechanism to distribute 3 bonus points for players in that match, and that is an additional fantasy return as well. So as I've mentioned, goalkeepers and defenders have clean sheets, goals and assists as their metric. And if I just break those details down, you can just read it further here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but because it's so rare for goalkeepers and defenders to score and assist, they have a higher weighting for goals and assists. When it comes to the midfielders and forwards, midfielders will get a clean sheet point if they have played a minimum of 60 minutes without conceding a goal. As for forwards, they will not get any clean sheet points at all. And when it comes to midfielders, if they score a goal, they will get they'll get 5 points for that goal. Whereas for a striker, a forward, they will get 4 points. So that's something that's just worth keeping in mind, that if you're looking to get value from a striker or a midfielder, you might consider that as well. So again, you can have a look at the scoring details, but in a nutshell, scoring is based on real life incidents, and those incidents are calculated as fantasy returns, basically based on clean sheets, assists, and goals, and then the fantasy element being bonus points. And as part of your fantasy football team play, there's something that's also available in the form of leagues, or they're also called mini leagues. So this is where you might get roped into a mini league at work or from your friends, and they're like, oh, join my mini league. In order to join a mini league, you've got a maximum limit of 30 of them, and all you will need is a code to be provided for that specific mini league. So if you're not the administrator, if your friend or your colleague is an administrator, they'll need to provide the code or a link. You click on the link or enter the code from your side, and then you can simply join whatever league you want. And I'll just show you how that can be done once you have the code. So let me just here. Just a moment. Just going to show it, just easiest way. I have got a video on it, but I think seeing as it's here as well, I'll just show how it can be done. So sharing my screen, create and join leagues. So you go to the My Team section of your team page, click on create and join leagues. You get the code from your friend or colleague or whoever, join a league and cup. And I'll explain the difference between a league and a cup. So you can also join public leagues as well, which are just random leagues if you haven't got any codes from your friends. So here we go, join invitational league and cup. And then here you enter your code, click on join league and you're in. The difference between a mini league or an invitational league and a cup is that the winner of the mini league will be the manager who has scored the highest number of points in that mini league by the end of the season, whereas the cup is based on a head-to-head record every game week. So you could have a situation in a cup format where you don't score a lot of points, but you actually score more points than your head-to-head opponent in a given game week, and you might actually be higher ranked based on that head-to-head record rather than your actual points. So that's really the difference between a mini league and a cup, and it just depends on what your particular preference is there. And when it comes to how the cups work as well, again, the difference is with a mini league, you've got the option to leave that mini league if you wish to do so, but with a cup, you're locked into it the moment that the cup starts. And normally, if you've got a cup that starts in game week 1, then you're locked in. But also, Fantasy Premier League also have their own cups that they start at certain points in the season, and that competition, the competition for an overall cup, will depend on a number of different factors, and you have to qualify for their official cup as well. And they've got like tiebreakers in that instance. So most goals scored in the game week, fewest goals conceded in the game week, or a virtual coin toss. But yeah, I mean, that's something that is more to digest than the back to basics, I guess. So what we've seen here is the basics in how to register your team, how to make your initial selection, how transfers work, what are chips, the deadlines, the scoring metrics, as well as mini leagues and the cups. I think in terms of the basics, that is more or less what you need to get going. And there are lots of other things that you can essentially learn about the game as well. But I think as a basic of the foundations of what the game is about, what I've covered there is really what you need to know just to get you going. And like I've said, you can play the game however you want. You might just log in once, register your team, and be done with it. That's completely fine. You might be someone who actually wants to take it seriously from the get-go, and you'll regularly monitor how your team does. That's completely fine as well. And if you want to be more engaged with how the game works and playing the game, then by all means, you can just literally Google a plethora of regular fantasy football content that's available. And there are multiple outlets. I provide weekly advice as well. And just take it in your own stride, really. There are those who play the game casually, like we've covered. There are those who are heavily addicted to the game. There are those who are essentially professional fantasy football managers at the one end of the scale. But like I've said, this is all about the foundations. It's all about the basics on how the game works. And I hope that I've covered those in the most appropriate way. And if you feel that this is of benefit to any other new fantasy football managers, then by all means, please share this video. And as I mentioned at the start of the video, if you can like, share, and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. Apart from that, I'm wishing you all the best for the season ahead. Take care and all the best. Thank you. Bye.